This 1896 photo looked peaceful, until experts identified the object in her lap. The morning fog clung to the streets of Lower Manhattan as Claire Morrison unlocked the heavy doors of the Immigration History Museum. At 29, she had spent 5 years curating exhibits that told stories of families who had crossed oceans seeking better lives. Today, she was preparing for the museum's largest exhibition yet, Faces of the New World, Immigrant Families 1880-1900. The previous afternoon, a delivery had arrived with no return address. Just a brown paper package containing a single photograph and a note that read, "She deserves to be remembered." Claire had set it aside, too busy with catalog preparations to examine it closely. Now, with her coffee steaming beside her and pale winter light filtering through the tall windows, she carefully unwrapped the photograph. The image showed a family of 5 posed in front of a modest wooden house. The father stood rigid in a dark suit, his hand resting on his wife's shoulder. The mother sat in a chair, her expression solemn beneath an elaborate hat. 2 teenage daughters flanked them, their faces serious as the camera required. But it was the 2 small girls seated on the ground that drew Claire's attention. They appeared to be identical twins, perhaps 6 years old, with dark curls and matching white dresses with lace collars. Their faces were hauntingly similar, the same wide eyes, the same delicate features. Yet something about their positioning seemed odd. One twin sat slightly forward, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The other sat just behind, and in her small arms, she cradled something wrapped in white cloth. Claire leaned closer, adjusting her desk lamp. The fabric was pristine, almost glowing in the sepia tones of the photograph. The package was small, perhaps the size of a loaf of bread, and the way the child held it suggested both reverence and sorrow. Her tiny fingers gripped the bundle tightly, and unlike the other family members who stared dutifully at the camera, this twin's gaze was fixed downward on whatever she held. "Odd," Claire murmured, tracing the image with her finger. She turned the photograph over. On the back, written in faded ink, were the words, "Familia Rossi, Mulberry Street, Maggio 1896. Of the Rossi family, May 1896. Mulberry Street meant Little Italy, the densely packed neighborhood where thousands of Italian immigrants had settled. Claire felt a familiar stirring of curiosity, the same feeling that had drawn her to museum work in the first place. Every photograph held a story, but this one felt different. This one felt urgent. She reached for her telephone to call her colleague, Dr. Robert Chen, a specialist in Victorian photography. Dr. Robert Chen arrived at the museum just before noon, his leather satchel worn from years of carrying photographic equipment and reference books. At 53, he had examined thousands of 19th century photographs, and his expertise in Victorian customs had made him invaluable to museums across the city. "Claire, always a pleasure," he said, removing his coat and draping it over a chair in her office. "You mentioned something unusual?" She handed him the photograph without a word. Chen settled into the chair across from her desk, pulling a magnifying loupe from his pocket. For several minutes he said nothing, moving the glass slowly across the image, pausing occasionally to lean closer. The office was quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock and the distant sounds of workers preparing exhibit spaces. Claire watched his face, noting how his expression shifted from curious to concerned. "Where did you get this?" he finally asked, his voice careful. "Anonymous donation yesterday. Just this photo and a note saying she deserves to be remembered. No name, no return address." Chen set down the loupe and removed his glasses, cleaning them with a handkerchief, a habit Claire recognized as his way of buying time to formulate his thoughts. "Claire, I need to ask you something, and I want you to look at the photograph again. Focus on what the child is holding. Look at the size, the shape, the way the fabric is wrapped." She picked up the magnifying glass and examined the white bundle. The cloth was wrapped tightly, almost ceremonially, with what appeared to be delicate ribbon or cord securing it. The proportions were small but distinctly human-shaped, rounded at one end, tapered at the other. A chill ran down her spine as understanding began to dawn. "Victorian mourning photography," Chen said quietly. "Specifically, Infant morning photography. That child isn't holding a doll or a toy, Claire. She's holding her deceased sibling. Claire set down the loop, her hand trembling slightly. She had read about the practice, how families in the 19th century, faced with devastating child mortality rates, would commission photographs with their deceased children as a final memorial. But she had never seen one quite like this. "Are you certain?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Look at the positioning, the way the family is arranged. The mother's expression. That's not just Victorian formality, that's grief. The father's hand on her shoulder isn't just for the photograph, it's support. And these twins." He pointed to the two girls on the ground. One of them was likely a triplet. The living twins are honoring their sister. Claire felt her throat tighten. Why would someone send this anonymously? "That," Chen said, "is what you need to find out." That evening, Claire sat at her kitchen table in her small apartment on East 14th Street, surrounded by reference books on Italian immigration and New York City directories from the 1890s. The photograph lay in the center of the table, a silent witness to her growing obsession. She had telephoned 3 colleagues at different historical societies, none of whom had heard of the Rossi family from Mulberry Street. The name was common. Too common. Hundreds of Rossis had lived in Little Italy during that period, many arriving from the same southern Italian villages where the surname dominated. Claire opened her notebook and began listing what she knew. Familia Rossi, Mulberry Street, May 1896. 2 living twins, approximately 6 years old. Deceased infant, formal mourning photograph. She added observations. The father's suit suggested modest prosperity, perhaps a shopkeeper or skilled tradesman. The mother's hat was of reasonable quality. The teenage daughter's dresses indicated the family could afford some luxuries, though nothing extravagant. The apartment grew dark as she worked, and she lit the oil lamp on her table, its warm glow casting shadows across the photograph. Outside, she could hear the evening sounds of the city, vendors closing their carts, neighbors calling to each other, the distant clatter of horse-drawn carriages. Her mind drifted to her own sister, Margaret, who lived in Boston with her husband and 3 children. Claire had visited last Christmas and had watched Margaret cradle her youngest, a baby boy barely 3 months old. The love in her sister's eyes had been absolute, all-consuming. What would it be like to lose that? To hold your child one final time for a photograph, knowing it would be the only image you'd ever have? Claire shook her head, forcing herself back to the task. Emotion was natural, but it wouldn't help her find answers. She needed to approach this methodically. The next morning, she would visit the New York Public Library's genealogy department. They maintained extensive records of immigrant families, including church registries, census data, and cemetery records. If the Rossi family had lived in Little Italy in 1896, there would be traces of them. But as she prepared for bed, carefully placing the photograph in a protective envelope, one question kept circling through her mind. Why had someone wanted this family remembered now, nearly 40 years after the photograph was taken? And why send it anonymously? She fell asleep with those questions unanswered, the image of the small twin holding her dead sister imprinted behind her closed eyes. The genealogy department of the New York Public Library occupied a quiet corner on the 3rd floor, where researchers sat hunched over massive ledgers and boxes of documents. Claire had arrived when the doors opened, armed with her notebook and a list of Italian parishes that had served the Mulberry Street area in the 1890s. The librarian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson, who had worked there for 30 years, listened to Claire's request with interest. "Rossi from Mulberry Street, 1896, she repeated, pursing her lips. "That's going to be challenging. Do you know which province in Italy they came from?" Claire shook her head. "Only that they were photographed in May of that year, and there were twin girls about 6 years old." Mrs. Patterson disappeared into the stacks and returned with 3 large record books. "These are baptismal registers from St. Patrick's Old Cathedral, which served the Italian community. If your twins were born in New York, they'd be registered here. Start with 1890 and work forward." For 3 hours, Claire carefully turned the fragile pages, reading entries written in various hands, some neat and careful, others barely legible. The records were in Italian and Latin, documenting the births and baptisms of hundreds of children: Maria, Giuseppe, Antonio, Rosa, Lucia. So many names, so many families starting new lives in a strange country. She found 17 sets of twins born between 1889 and 1891. 3 were named Rossi. Her heart quickened as she copied the information into her notebook. Rosa and Lucia Rossi, born January 3, 1890, baptized January 12, 1890. Parents, Giovanni and Caterina Rossi. Residence, 142 Mulberry Street. The dates aligned. If these were the twins in the photograph, they would have been 6 years old in May 1896. Claire's hands trembled slightly as she continued searching for any other references to the family. 20 pages later, she found it. Angela Maria Rossi, born January 3, 1890, died April 28, 1896. Cause of death, scarlet fever. Buried May 1, 1896. Calvary Cemetery. Claire stared at the entry, her throat tight. Triplets, Rosa, Lucia, and Angela, born on the same day, baptized together, but only 2 survived past their 6th birthday. The photograph had been taken in May 1896, just days after Angela's burial. This wasn't just a mourning photograph. It was taken immediately after the funeral, while grief was still raw and overwhelming. She continued searching and found more entries. The parents had married in 1885 in New York. They had 2 older daughters, Francesca and Giuliana, born in 1887 and 1888. A son, Matteo, had been born in 1893, but died of pneumonia before his 1st birthday. The next Saturday dawned cold and gray, with heavy clouds promising rain. Claire took the elevated train to Queens, watching the city transform from crowded tenements to lower buildings, and eventually to the vast expanse of Calvary Cemetery. Established in 1848, it had become the final resting place for thousands of New York's Catholic immigrants. The cemetery office was a small stone building near the main entrance. Inside, a young clerk named Thomas greeted her with professional courtesy that warmed slightly when she explained her research. "I'm looking for burial records from May 1896, she said, showing him her notes. Angela Maria Rossi, 6 years old, buried May 1st. Thomas consulted a massive leather-bound register, running his finger down columns of names. "Here," he said, turning the book so she could see. Section 14, Plot 247. The family purchased a plot that accommodates 6 burials. There are currently 3 interments listed. 3? Claire asked. He nodded, checking his records. Angela Maria Rossi, 1890 to 1896. Matteo Rossi, 1893 to 1894. And... He paused, his expression softening. Caterina Rossi, 1867 to 1898. The mother, dead just 2 years after Angela. Claire felt a wave of sadness wash over her. Do the records indicate cause of death for Caterina? No official cause listed, but there's a notation, consumption. That usually meant tuberculosis. Claire thanked him and took the map he offered, marking the location of Section 14. The cemetery stretched across nearly 400 acres, its rolling hills dotted with monuments, crosses, and simple headstones. She walked for 20 minutes, passing countless graves, each representing a story, a family, a loss. Section 14 was on a gentle slope overlooking a small pond. The graves here were modest. No elaborate marble angels or imposing mausoleums, just simple stones marking the resting places of working families. She found Plot 247 easily. 3 small headstones stood together, weathered by decades of rain and snow. The inscriptions were simple. Angela Maria Rossi, beloved daughter. January 3, 1890. April 28, 1896. Safe in the arms of Jesus. Matteo Rossi, our precious son. May 15, 1893. December 2, 1894. Too beautiful for earth. Caterina Rossi, devoted wife and mother. March 12, 1867. November 18, 1898. Reunited with her angels. Claire knelt beside the graves, running her fingers over the cold stone. The inscription on Caterina's headstone struck her deeply. Reunited with her angels. The mother who had lost 2 children had finally joined them. She wondered about Giovanni, the father in the photograph. Where was he? Had he remarried? Lived a long life? or had grief consumed him too? As she stood to leave, rain began to fall, soft at first, then steadily harder. She opened her umbrella but remained a moment longer, looking at the 3 graves of the Rossi family, feeling the weight of their story settling around her. Monday morning found Claire back at the library, this time requesting census records. If she could track the Rossi family through the 1900 census, taken 4 years after the photograph and 2 years after Caterina's death, she might learn what became of Giovanni and his surviving daughters. The 1900 census for New York City filled dozens of volumes, and Claire spent hours searching through the enumeration districts that covered Little Italy. The records were handwritten, some entries clear, others nearly illegible, filled with creative spellings of Italian names by census takers who didn't speak the language. She found them on page 47 of District 182. Giovanni Rossi, head of household, age 42, born Italy, immigrated 1884, occupation, grocer, owns shop, literate in Italian. Francesca Rossi, daughter, age 13, born New York, attending school. Giuliana Rossi, daughter, age 12, born New York, attending school. Rosa Rossi, daughter, age 10, born New York, attending school. Lucia Rossi, daughter, age 10, born New York, attending school. 4 daughters. Caterina was listed as deceased, no new wife. Giovanni had apparently raised his surviving daughters alone after Caterina's death. Claire felt a deep admiration for this man she'd never met. A widower managing a grocery store while ensuring his daughters received education. She cross-referenced with city directories and found Rossi's Groceria, listed at 142 Mulberry Street from 1895 through 1912. The shop had operated for 17 years before the listing disappeared. She made notes to search for later records. Perhaps the 1910 or 1920 census would show where the family went next. But as she worked, one question continued to bother her. Why would someone send that photograph anonymously now in 1934? Angela had died 38 years ago. Caterina 36 years ago. If Giovanni was still alive, he'd be 76 years old. The twins would be 44. Who had kept that photograph all these years? And why did they want Angela remembered now? Claire decided her next step was to search through New York City death records for Giovanni Rossi. If he had died recently, perhaps that was the connection. Someone settling an estate, finding the photograph, and feeling it deserved a place in history rather than being discarded. As she gathered her materials to leave, Mrs. Patterson approached with another ledger. "I thought you might want to see this," she said. "It's a register of businesses licensed in Lower Manhattan. I pulled it while you were working." Claire opened it and immediately found what Mrs. Patterson had marked. Rossi's Groceria, proprietor, Rosa Rossi, 1913-1925. Rosa, Claire breathed. One of the twins took over the family business. And probably lived above it as most shopkeepers did, Mrs. Patterson added. "If you want to find these women, I'd start with current property records for that address." The Hall of Records occupied a massive building downtown, and Claire spent Tuesday morning navigating its bureaucratic maze. Property records for 142 Mulberry Street showed that the building had changed hands several times since 1925. The current owner was a development company that had purchased the entire block. But the crucial information came from earlier records. In 1925, Rosa Rossi had sold the property to a Mr. Angelo Martinelli. The deed included a forwarding address, 89 Thompson Street, apartment 3B. Claire's pulse quickened. Thompson Street was less than half a mile from Mulberry. She could walk there in 15 minutes. Was it possible Rosa still lived there? After 9 years? She left the Hall of Records and headed north, her mind racing. What would she say? How do you approach someone and tell them you have a photograph of them as a child holding their dead sister? Thompson Street was narrower than Mulberry, lined with 4-story buildings whose fire escapes zigzagged down brick facades. Number 89 was distinguished by a green door and a row of window boxes where someone had planted winter pansies. Claire's hand shook slightly as she pressed the buzzer for apartment 3B. She heard it ring inside, then footsteps descending stairs. The door opened to reveal a woman in her mid-40s with dark hair streaked with gray, wearing a simple house dress and an apron dusted with flour. "Yes?" the woman asked in accented English. I'm looking for Rosa Rossi, Claire said. My name is Claire Morrison. I work at the Immigration History Museum and She paused, unsure how to continue. I have something that belonged to your family. The woman's expression shifted from polite curiosity to something harder to read. I am Rosa Rossi. What is it you have? Claire withdrew the photograph from her satchel, still in its protective envelope. Someone sent this to the museum anonymously. I've been researching your family's story. I wanted to make sure it was treated with respect. Rosa took the envelope with trembling hands. She stared at it for a long moment before opening it. When she saw the photograph, her face went pale. She gripped the doorframe for support. Madonna Santa, she whispered. Where did you get this? May I come in? Claire asked gently. I'll tell you everything I know. Rosa nodded wordlessly and led Claire up 3 flights of narrow stairs to a small but immaculately kept apartment. Lace curtains filtered the afternoon light. Religious icons hung on the walls alongside family photographs. Rosa gestured for Claire to sit at a small kitchen table while she made coffee with shaking hands. I haven't seen this photograph in 30 years, Rosa finally said, sitting across from Claire. My father kept it in a box under his bed. After he died in 1929, Lucia and I went through his things. We argued about this picture. She wanted to keep it. I wanted to burn it. Why burn it? Claire asked softly. Rosa's eyes filled with tears. Because every time I see it, I remember holding Angela, feeling how cold she was, how small. My mother made us pose like that, made me hold her one last time. I was 6 years old. I didn't understand death. I thought maybe if I held her tight enough, she would wake up. Rosa wiped her eyes with her apron and stood, moving to a sideboard where she retrieved a small wooden box. Inside were more photographs, letters, and documents, the preserved history of the Rossi family. This is my parents on their wedding day, she said, showing Claire a faded photograph. 19 years old, both of them, barely able to speak English. Papa worked on the docks. Mama took in laundry. They saved everything to open the groceria. She spread more photographs across the table. The 2 older sisters as teenagers, a young boy in christening clothes who must have been Matteo, and several portraits of the family as it grew. When Angela died, everything changed, Rosa continued, her voice heavy. Mama was never the same. She would wake up screaming, dreaming that all 3 of us had died. She became terrified of illness. Any cough, any fever, and she would panic. She made us stay home from school for weeks if anyone in the neighborhood got sick. The census said she died of consumption in 1898. Claire said gently. Rosa nodded. Tuberculosis. She caught it from a customer at the shop. By the time the doctor diagnosed it, there was nothing to be done. She wasted away in 6 months. At the end, she kept asking if Angela was waiting for her, if Matteo was there too. Papa would lie and say yes. They were waiting. They were together. Claire felt tears prickling her own eyes. Your father never remarried? Never. He said Mama was his only love. He raised us alone, me, Lucia, Francesca, and Giuliana. Francesca married young, moved to New Jersey. Giuliana married too, went to Chicago. But Lucia and I stayed. We ran the groceria after Papa got too old to manage it. When he died, we sold it and split the money. Where is Lucia now? Claire asked. Rosa's expression darkened. That's why I think she sent you that photograph. Lucia is dying. She has cancer. The doctors say she has maybe 3 months. She's in St. Vincent's Hospital right now. Claire felt her stomach drop. I'm so sorry. Last week, she asked me to bring Papa's box to the hospital. She wanted to look through everything one more time. That photograph was in there. We argued again, same argument we've been having for years. She said Angela deserved to be remembered, that our story deserved to be told. I said some things were too painful to share, that it should stay private, stay in our family. Rosa's voice broke. She must have convinced someone to send it to your museum. She knew I would never agree to it. Do you want me to return it? Claire asked quietly. I can take it back right now. Forget I ever saw it. Rosa stared at the photograph for a long moment, her fingers tracing the image of the small girl holding the white bundle. "No," she finally said. "Maybe Lucia is right. Maybe Angela does deserve to be remembered. And Matteo. And Mama. Maybe people should know how hard it was, how much families like ours sacrificed and lost." She looked up at Claire with red-rimmed eyes. "Will you go see Lucia? She should know someone cares about our story. She should know Angela won't be forgotten." St. Vincent's Hospital stood on 7th Avenue, a massive brick building that had served Manhattan's sick and dying since 1849. Claire arrived the following afternoon, carrying a small bouquet of white roses and the photograph in its envelope. The hospital corridors smelled of disinfectant and boiled vegetables, and the sound of coughing echoed from various rooms. Lucia Rossi occupied a bed in the women's ward on the 3rd floor, a long room lined with identical metal beds separated by thin curtains. A nurse directed Claire to bed 17, where a woman who looked remarkably like Rosa lay propped against pillows, her face gaunt and pale but her eyes still bright with intelligence. "Mrs. Martinelli?" Claire asked softly, using the married name the nurse had provided. "Miss Morrison." Lucia's voice was weak but clear. "Rosa telephoned to say you might come. Please, sit down." Claire pulled a chair close to the bed and placed the roses on the nightstand. "Your sister said you might have been the one to send this photograph to the museum." Lucia's thin lips curved into a small smile. "Guilty. I had my son's wife mail it. I knew Rosa would never agree, but I'm dying, and I don't want Angela to die again with me. She existed. She lived. For 6 years and 4 months she was here. She was real. She was loved." "Tell me about her," Claire said. "What was she like?" Lucia's eyes grew distant, remembering. "She was the smallest of us triplets. Came out last, fighting the whole way, Mama always said. She had the loudest laugh. She loved to sing, even though she couldn't carry a tune. She followed Papa everywhere, always wanting to help in the shop, always asking questions about everything." She paused, catching her breath, and Claire waited patiently. When she got sick, it happened so fast. One morning she woke up with a fever and a rash. By that afternoon, her throat had swollen so much she could barely breathe. The doctor came, but there was nothing he could do. Scarlet fever was everywhere that spring. Half the children on our street got sick. Some recovered. Angela didn't. "I went to her grave," Claire said. "And your mother's, and your brother Matteo's." Lucia nodded. "All together, as Mama wanted. She made Papa promise before she died that when her time came, she would be buried between her babies. Papa kept that promise. When he died, we buried him in plot 248, right next to them, the family together again. Except the living," Claire observed. "Except the living," Lucia agreed. "Rosa and I used to visit every Sunday after Mass. We'd bring flowers, clean the stones, sit and talk to them. After Papa died, Rosa stopped going, said it hurt too much. But I kept visiting until," she gestured weakly at herself, "until I couldn't anymore." Claire leaned forward. "Lucia, I want to honor your family's story properly. Would you be willing to let me interview you more extensively? Record everything you remember. The museum is planning an exhibition about immigrant families, and your story, Angela's story, could help people understand what life was really like." Lucia's eyes filled with tears. "I would like that very much. But you should include Rosa, too. She remembers things I've forgotten. And she needs to tell Angela's story as much as I do, even if she doesn't know it yet." 3 months later, on a warm evening in June 1934, the Immigration History Museum opened its new exhibition, Faces of the New World, Immigrant Families, 1880-1900. Over 300 guests crowded into the gallery, examining photographs, reading diary entries, and studying artifacts that told stories of hope, struggle, loss, and perseverance. But one display drew more attention than any other. In a quiet corner of the gallery, under soft lighting, hung the photograph of the Rossi family. Beside it, Claire had carefully arranged other materials: the baptismal records for Rosa, Lucia, and Angela, Giovanni and Caterina's marriage certificate, photographs of Rossi's Groceria, census records showing the family's progress through the decades, and a small white christening gown that had belonged to Angela, preserved all these years in Rosa's cedar chest. The exhibition text Claire had written read, "In May 1896, the Rossi family of Mulberry Street posed for this photograph just days after burying their 6-year-old daughter, Angela, who died of scarlet fever. Her twin sister holds her for the last time, wrapped in the christening gown all 3 triplets had worn. This image represents not only one family's grief but the experience of countless immigrant families who faced devastating child mortality rates. Of the 5 children born to Giovanni and Caterina Rossi, only 2, Rosa and Lucia, survived to adulthood. Caterina herself died 2 years after this photograph was taken, worn down by tuberculosis and grief. Yet the family persevered. Giovanni raised his surviving daughters alone, operated a successful grocery for 25 years, and ensured all 4 girls received educations.
This photograph honors not only Angela, but all the children lost too soon and the families who carried their memories forward. Claire stood near the display, watching visitors pause and read, seeing their expressions shift from curiosity to understanding to sadness. Some reached out to touch the glass protecting the photograph, as if trying to comfort the child holding her sister. Rosa stood beside her, having finally agreed to come.
She had brought her own children, 3 daughters and a son, and her grandchildren. They gathered around the display, and Rosa pointed out details to them. "That's me, holding Angela, and that's your great-aunt Lucia beside me. Those are your great-aunts Francesca and Giuliana, and those are your great-grandparents, Giovanni and Caterina." Her youngest granddaughter, about 6 years old, studied the photograph seriously. "She was your sister?" she asked.
"Yes,"
Rosa said, her voice thick with emotion. "Her name was Angela Maria. She loved to sing." The little girl nodded solemnly. "I'll remember her." Rosa knelt down and hugged her granddaughter tightly. When she stood, tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling. "Thank you," she said to Claire. "Lucia was right. This needed to be told. Angela deserved to be remembered." Claire squeezed Rosa's hand. "She won't be forgotten now. None of them will." As the evening wore on and more visitors circulated through the gallery, Claire noticed how many stopped at the Rossi display, how many lingered, how many left with tears in their eyes. The photograph that had arrived anonymously 3 months ago had become something more than a historical artifact. It had become a bridge across time, connecting the living to the lost, reminding everyone who saw it that behind every statistic about immigrant life, behind every number in a mortality record, were real people who loved and grieved and hoped. Late that night, after the last guests had departed and the museum had closed, Claire stood alone before the photograph. She thought of Lucia, who had died 2 weeks earlier, never getting to see the exhibition but knowing her wish would be honored. She thought of Rosa, who had finally made peace with a grief she'd carried for 38 years. She thought of Angela, who had lived only 6 years, but whose memory would now touch thousands. And she thought about all the anonymous stories still waiting to be discovered, photographs in attics and basements, letters in forgotten boxes, memories fading with each passing generation. Each one deserved to be told, to be honored, to be remembered. Claire reached out and gently touched the frame holding the Rossi family photograph. "Rest well," she whispered. "Your story is told,